Orlando Sanchez, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us today, and I appreciate you taking the time out to meet with us.
Good to be with you, Professor.
So, I often hear people say, well, let's talk about the Latino vote, the Latino vote. Why is that not accurate? Why is there no Latino vote?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you want to break it down. If you're talking about an ethnicity, people that speak a common language, there is a Latino vote. If you're talking about nationality, there is no Latino vote. If you're talking about race, there is no Latino vote. So it's kind of an enigma, but for political pundits, it's easier to classify all of us into a Latino vote.
So let's talk about you have a new organization, or it's relatively new, called Texas Latino Conservatives that you founded. Tell us a little bit about why you started this organization and what you hope to do.
Well, as you know, Professor, I served on the Houston City Council. I was sworn in 1995. At the time, the City Council had 9 members, both district and at large, and 9 district members, 5 at large, and the mayor, which was at the time Bob Lanier. During my term, we had Gracie Sines, Orlando Sanchez, Sylvia Garcia, Felix Fraga. We had John Castillo. We had a gentleman that was also Gabe Vasquez. We had probably half a dozen Hispanics on the city council today, despite the fact that the population of Latinos in Houston has grown tremendously, despite the fact that the city council has been expanded by charter. We're down to 1 Hispanic. And so when I was elected county treasurer in Harris County, and I served in that position for 12 years, I saw that the Latino vote was actually, or the number of Hispanics elected was dwindling. And I thought that the demographics and the projections made by Professor Kleinberg, the state demographer, used to be at Texas A&M, now is at the University of Texas, San Antonio. They were predicting an exploding Hispanic population in the state, and I knew Houston was going to grow, but we had no representation. So I started a political action committee called Texas Latino Conservatives, and also we have a 501c4 by the same name, to encourage Hispanics and to educate Hispanics about the importance of participating in political elections, and to help financially Hispanics that were running for various positions. We only do state elections. We cannot, by law, get involved in federal elections.
So the question of conservative Latinos is really confusing to some people because I think that there's a prevailing attitude that Hispanics vote Democrat, always have and always will. Why is that a misperception, and what do the conservatives have to offer?
Well, let me start by addressing the issue of a misconception. It's obviously a misconception when you have, in recent elections, in recent history, you may have 60% voting Democrat, but you have almost 40% voting Republican. In prior years, when George W. Bush was governor of Texas, you had closer to a 48%, 47% of the Latinos voting for the Republican governor, George W. Bush. So it's fluctuated. So that myth that the Latino vote is monolithic in terms of party is incorrect. What do Republicans have to offer? What do conservatives in general? Because we have a lot of Democrats that are conservative, by the way.
Absolutely.
So what does conservatism have to offer? Generally, and this is very broad, very general, because there's a lot of nuances in here, but it's generally a concept of limited government, support of free markets, a form of government that the founders envisioned, which was a Republican form of government with a little r, and where the scheme of representation takes place. So as you read the Constitution, that power is not specifically delegated to a federal government, are reserved to the states. That's essentially what we believe. We believe that every person is created equal, is seen equally by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And those are the sort of the principles we fight for. Now we can get into specific issues about, well, if you believe in that, then why are you in the bedroom, and why are you in this, and why are you in that? And we can discuss those. But generally, it's sort of a small government that gets out of the way of entrepreneurs, gets out of the way of families, lets families raise their children how they want, and make their own personal financial decisions.
And one of the things that you bring out about businesses, there's a lot of Hispanic business owners, and there always has been. And I know that in founding your organization, I was looking at your webpage, which is TexasLatinoConservatives.com, that you talk about this, and you talk about the business owner and the business community in the Hispanic community wanting more freedom to do business as they wish.
Well, I can give you one example, Gene. Recently, we conducted a massive, one-of-a-kind poll in the state of Texas of only registered Hispanic voters. We wanted to know what Hispanics were thinking. I'll give you one example. The oil and gas industry is supported by over 62% of Latino voters, meaning that if you go to counties like Starr County or out in West Texas, where there's a lot of oil fields, there are a lot of Hispanics making a great living, either working on platforms, driving lowboys and bringing in, earth-moving equipment, driving pipe on their trucks, anything affiliated. Here in Houston, you don't have to look very far up and down Lawndale and 225 to see the massive concentration of refineries. A huge number of Latinos are making a six-figure salary working those refineries. So Hispanics support the oil and gas industry. And for example, recently, when pipelines are shut down, when they want to put more restrictions on oil and gas, Hispanics fear for their economic future. So yeah, they want, we're all aware of the environment, the absolute necessary requirement to be good stewards of the environment, but we also know that oil and gas powers our economy, and Hispanics play a major role in that.
Let me talk about some of the issues, or let me ask you about some of the issues that are on your website that do attract the interest of Hispanics. Let's talk about health issues. What are some of the health concerns?
Number one is access to health care. Even though we have the Affordable Care Act, premiums are still running pretty high. Number one, there are a lot of working Hispanic families that can't even afford the premiums for the Affordable Care Act. Number two, the incidence of obesity and then, unfortunately, consequently, type 2 diabetes is off the charts. It's off the charts in minority communities among African Americans, but it is exploding among Hispanic youth. As we know, untreated diabetes type 2 will lead to severe health complications, which are expensive for the public health system. It leads to amputations, it leads to circulatory problems, it leads to renal failure, it leads to blindness, and ultimately death. And so we're very concerned about accessing the healthcare system, bringing information about better lifestyles to the Hispanic community. It's something that we're pushing really hard, especially through our 501c4.
Those are some concerns that a lot of people have, and I'm glad you brought them up. What about education? Where do Hispanics face the need for better education and more education, and some of the concerns that you're seeing?
Well, as you know, a good portion of our population in Houston and in Texas is undocumented. Many of those children come with their parents and are language deficient at 5 or 6 years of age. They begin with a language deficiency. I remember, I'll never forget, that I attended a meeting at Rice University, and Professor Kleinberg was talking about that a child from a low-income family, doesn't have to be undocumented, but a child from a low-income family begins kindergarten as compared to, let's say, somebody from a more affluent area, Caucasians, with a massive multi-thousand word deficiency in their vocabulary. That's a recipe for disaster. So one of the things we're interested in is, again, it's not very popular with, some Republicans, early childhood education. We believe at Texas Latino Conservatives that every child needs an opportunity to receive the best education possible because, as you know, Professor, I'm an immigrant. I didn't speak English when I got to this country. I'm assuming your background, somewhere in your family tree, it was similar, that people were language deficient. And the reason I believe that you and I have been successful is because of the education that we received. And I think it's imperative that every child, regardless of race, regardless of citizenship status, deserves a fair shot at the American dream.
And let's talk about border security because that kind of dovetails into that other issue you're bringing up about the immigration status of many people that are coming into the United States. What is your position for the Texas Latino Conservatives on the border issue? Because that's been a real hot topic lately.
I don't know that we have enough time in 30 minutes to discuss that, but essentially, I can tell you that I am an immigrant. I came to this country seeking asylum from a communist country back when Congress allowed Cubans to come to this country and seek asylum. I was given a green card. I lived here with a green card for many years until I was in my 20s. I actually served in the United States Air Force as a legal resident, not as a U.S. citizen. And then, after being honorably discharged from the Air Force, I became a U.S. citizen. I don't believe that anybody, even the Hispanic community, believes in lawlessness at our border. I think people come here expecting that the laws be enforced. Now, having said that, we have an immigration problem in this country and have had for many years. The last time that the immigration system was looked at was 1986, when Ronald Reagan allowed many undocumented people to apply for a legal status and citizenship. What's interesting about 1986, Gene, is that about 63% of Hispanics that were eligible to apply for U.S. citizenship never did. They received their green cards or permanent residency status and never sought citizenship. So what that tells me is that here's another problem. I think current policy, and I'm not going to blame Republicans or Democrats because both parties have had command and control over both the White House, the Senate, and the Congress, the House of Representatives, and neither one has done anything. So there's plenty of blame to go around. The blame game doesn't resolve anything. But the fact of the matter is that both parties, because the American economy has an insatiable appetite for cheap labor, is basically exercising a wink and nod system at the border, the catch and release system. And let me tell you why that's not fair. That's not fair to the bulk of the people coming in, which aren't exclusively Latino, but a majority are Latino. And what's happening is we're creating a permanent underclass in this country of Hispanics, which is unfair. And so what we have proposed at Texas Latino Conservatives is what we call a family stabilization. In other words, families that have been here for a given period of time and have never violated the criminal code to be allowed to apply for a legal status. No pathway to citizenship. It's renewable every 2 or 3 or 4 years, whatever Congress decides. They pay the fees associated with the application process, and they get a legal status. Now they're documented. They pay their taxes. They can receive their benefits. And we've polled Hispanics. Hispanics love it. Incidentally, we polled Republicans, primary Republican voters, the reddest of the red in the 5 largest counties in Texas. And over 64% support a system that would allow documentation, a legal status for undocumented people. We also think that it's time that the DACA kids receive a legal status and let them filter into the American system. I mean, after all, ethnically, language-wise, their culture is American. Many of these children came when they were months old. They have no knowledge of their native countries. I think it's unfair. And so, but that's going to take a lot of heavy lifting in Congress, Gene, as you know.
So all the last issue that is on your website is another dovetail issue that blends into the education, the health, and the border security, and that's crime. And we saw in the recent elections that crime, especially in Harris County, was under question, but crime across the United States did go up during the past couple of years with COVID, it seems. And crime is of specific concern because in a lot of these communities where you have undocumented citizens, they're maybe not willing to call the police. So doesn't that make them compound their victim status?
Well, sure, it does. And, a lot of the undocumented folks operate in a cash market, for example, makes them subject to being victims of crime. I remember many years ago in the Houston Police Department, when I was a city councilman, tried to address this issue. Many undocumented aliens weren't banked. And so they dealt in cash, and there were, you know, a criminal element in Houston would wait for them and rob them. But yes, it is important. That's why it's important to support either family stabilization, what we call it, or there's a congresswoman in Florida, Congresswoman Salazar. She has introduced a similar proposal for Congress. It's called the Dignity Act. It essentially gives a legal status to non-criminal folks that have been here making a contribution, living under our laws correctly in the right manner. And to me, it seems like the right answer. And, I told my conservative Republican friends, what do you have to fear? I mean, in the old days, Republicans thought, well, we register Hispanics to vote, they're going to vote Democrat. Well, the data doesn't show that. The data shows that Hispanics, as they become upwardly mobile, as they move into the suburbs and to the exurbs, they're voting like their neighbors. That means they're voting conservative. So what do Republicans have to fear? I've not figured that one out.
Well, you bring up an important point, and I've seen this from various people who are conservative, who are Republican, who have said exactly what you've said. Well, if we let them vote, or as more of them vote, they're going to vote us out, and they'll vote the Democrats in. And I've often said, there's a lot of values that conservatives have that Hispanics share. And why do you think it's been a long time in coming with mainstream Republicanism realizing this? I mean, you've got people like the Bush family and others that have embraced that, but not everyone has. Why do you think that is?
Well, number one, and this as a professor of history, as a person who probably talks to a lot of your sociologists and psychologists on the campus. Humans have a fear of change. I think there's a fear of, Hispanics taking over or African Americans taking over. We have to dispel this concept that it's us versus them. The fact of the matter is, we're all Americans. We're the envy of the world, Professor, because the world sees us and they see that Jews and Muslims and Hindus and Christians and non-believers live in a society together, that we all have our separate houses of worship, that we're all covered by the same Constitution. If a criminal bombs a mosque or a Jewish synagogue or a cathedral in the Christendom, they're all prosecuted with the same extent and severity of the law. And so people admire that. And so we need to look at each other as Americans, people that come here and all are pulling the wagon in the same direction. And as soon as we quit looking at each other as, gay or Asian or Hispanic or Black or female, it'll be a society that, we're going to move on down the road.
Well, I thank you very much for that. Now, I want to bring up another issue. Recently, a friend of mine at Texas Tech University published a book, and it was called "Baseball is on the Air," I believe. And on the front cover was somebody who looked remarkably like you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I I got a call several years ago from the professor of history at Texas Tech, and said, I have a fascination with baseball, and I don't think there's been enough light given to Spanish broadcasting in Major League Baseball, and I'm writing a book. And the man featured on the cover on the right-hand side is Orlando Sanchez Diago. That was my father's name. As you know, when we immigrated to the States, I dropped Diago, and Immigration and Naturalization Services just named me Orlando Sanchez. So that's my father. And next to him is Rene Cardenas from Nicaragua. They were the two pioneers of Spanish broadcasting in Major League Baseball. The reason we ended up in this country, Gene, is because former county judge and former mayor Roy Hoffines hired my father to be one of the pioneers of Spanish baseball. And so Dad started broadcasting the 1962 inaugural season of the Colt 45s, who ultimately became the Houston Astros. And he remained with the Houston Astros for nearly 30 years. So yes, that's my father on the cover of the book.
Well, that's a remarkable story and a great coincidence. And I remember when I saw that, I texted you and I said, something about how did you guys get together and how did you guys meet? So that was really neat, really neat. So, what do you see the future is with the Republican Party? As more, I mean, because as you mentioned, 30 to 40% of Hispanics are voting Republican. Is mainstream Republicanism becoming more acceptable of that? Is it becoming more open? Are they starting to see things differently?
Well, I would hope so. You started the program by asking me about the mission of Texas Latino conservatives. I see us as having two missions. One is spreading the word of conservatism to the Latino community, which, if they're just watching mainstream media, I think any fair-minded person would admit that the mainstream media has not been fair to conservatives and conservatism. But so my job, not only spreading what conservatism means, because at the end of the day, I remind people, Gene, and you know this, the Republican Party was founded for one reason and one reason only, and that was for the elimination of slavery in this country, a horrible institution that was foisted among African Americans and the American people. And it was, a Republican president, the first Republican president, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And I remind Republicans all the time, when Juneteenth comes around, you guys ought to be celebrating. That's the culmination of the reason you guys were founded. And unfortunately, it's fallen on deaf ears over the last decade or two. So my job is not only to spread conservatism to the Latino community, but to also educate Republicans, the executive committee of Republican parties. There's 254 counties in Texas, and each county is led by an executive committee with a county chair. And so my job is to educate the Republican establishment. They have nothing to fear. As FDR said, the only thing you have to fear is fear itself. Because there is a community of hardworking people that want a good education, that have good family values, that are entrepreneurs, that work hard and make a contribution every day in America. Why wouldn't you reach out to them? And frankly, there's also hundreds and thousands of people in the African American community with the same values. So you guys need to get out of your comfort zones, wherever those are, and get out into the churches, into the barrios, into the Hispanic chambers of commerce. And find out what's going on and reach out. So I'm optimistic. And let me tell you another reason why I'm optimistic. I think you saw in the last election, Gene, that we have a tremendous swath of Hispanics in elected office now. We almost elected Monica de la Cruz got elected. Mayra Flores was the first Mexican native naturalized citizen to serve in the United States Congress. By the way, trained by us through our Leadership Latino program of Texas Latino Conservatives. Tony Gonzalez out of Eagle Pass, Texas, a Republican conservative Air Force veteran in the United States Congress. We have our former executive director of the Texas Latino Conservatives, Michelle Gamboa of Juarez, Mexico, graduated from Texas A&M, is the first Latina ever elected to the city council in Longview, Texas. We elected a son of two Mexicans to the Kerrville City Council, Roman Garcia, 18 years old. We helped elect the first Hispanic to the Midland City Council, Dan Corrales, an Army veteran with two law degree that practices in the state of New York and Texas. We have such talent in the Latino community, and these young people are spreading the message of conservatism into their Hispanic communities.
Let's talk a little bit about your leadership program. We kind of touched on it, but can you tell us a little bit? Somebody wants to get involved. What can they expect?
Well, we just had 2 weekends ago the largest class of leadership Latino that we've ever had. I remind you that in 2018, I went down to the Rio Grande Valley and trained a handful of Hispanic kids to run for office. One of those was Mayra Flores. But fast forward to 2023, 2 weekends ago, we had about 48 young, and it weren't all Hispanics. We had 2 African Americans in the class. We had a lot of Caucasian women, but the class was made up mostly of Hispanics. What do? It's a full day class on basics of politics, how to file an ethics form, how to file your campaign contribution expenditure reports, how to create a basic website, how to dress, how to address the media, how to raise money, how to focus on your issues, the do's and don'ts of campaigning. Because a lot of these folks go back, and many of them right now are running for their local school board. They're running for their city council. They're running for a county treasurer position or a district clerk or county sheriff. So we give them the basic bolts and nuts, basically, of campaigning. Now, many of them come back to us with questions, and we're here not only to help them financially through our PAC, but to also answer questions. We have CPAs, we have election compliance experts, we have lawyers on hand. So we have the whole back office system to help these young conservative Hispanics get their feet on the ground and become effective and winning candidates.
Orlando Sanchez, I want to thank you for all of that information. It's very good. And again, if people want to get more information about Texas Latino Conservatives, it's those 3 words, Texas Latino Conservatives, altogether.com for your webpage. Are there any other contact points that people need to be aware of? I know you have some representatives in various cities.
We do. We have field directors across the state of Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley, in Bexar County, in El Paso, in Dallas County. We have them here in Harris County. We also do what's monthly meetings. We call them Plática en Politics. And we also quarterly issue a newsletter called El Chisme. And so you can join Texas Latino Conservatives by making a small contribution. I think it's $35. You get all the benefits of the newsletter and knowing exactly what's going on. You don't have to join Texas Latino Conservatives. You can simply go to our website and peruse the information. You can see our videos. We do a weekly program called TLC Live on our YouTube channel and on Facebook, where we bring in Hispanics from across the state, and then not necessarily all Hispanics, but we touch on issues that are important to the Hispanic community, so you can join us on that. So we've got a lot going on. We're busy, but we're optimistic about the future, Gene.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and information about Texas Latino Conservatives with us. Orlando Sanchez, it's always a pleasure visiting with you and having you on the show.
Thank you, Professor, for all you do.